She only wanted to play with the innocent young millionaire, but one look was enough to see who really controlled the game. The experienced woman felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. That night, he taught her that power can seduce too. Chapter 1. The Contract. In the penthouse of the Atlantic Tower, overlooking the South Beach shoreline, Catherine Mendez adjusted her form-fitting black dress as she observed Miami through the panoramic window. The afternoon sun illuminated the perfect curve of the causeways and the endless expanse of the ocean. The city, seen from that height, seemed as organized as her own life. Every element in its proper place, every movement calculated for maximum efficiency. At 35, Catherine was what the Miami market called the communications sorceress. A specialist in crisis management and image consulting, she transformed scandals into opportunities, rebuilt ruined reputations, and manipulated public opinion with the same ease with which she chose her designer clothes in the morning. Her office in Brickell Mendez Strategic Consulting was the destination for entrepreneurs, politicians, and celebrities who needed a second chance. "You have 15 minutes before the video conference with Chicago," reminded Deborah, her assistant, for the third time that afternoon. Catherine merely nodded, not taking her eyes off the landscape. The meeting was just another item on her impeccable schedule. A problematic client, a predictable scandal, a methodical solution. Nothing that challenged her intelligence or her patience. Her career, like her relationships, followed a mathematical pattern of predictability. "Tomorrow's client has confirmed the time. Julian Alistair from Alistair Investments," Deborah continued, now standing in the doorway with her tablet. That name made Catherine turn around. The reclusive heir. Exactly. The one who took over after his father was hospitalized. That whole story about the crisis at the company because of rumors about old man Alistair's health. Catherine allowed herself a subtle smile. She knew the case well. Marcus Alistair, founder of one of the country's largest investment groups, had been hospitalized with a heart condition 3 months ago. Rumors about his health sent the stock plummeting, and his son, until then an almost invisible figure in Miami society, took control in the midst of the storm. "He specifically requested you," Deborah added. "Said he wouldn't work with any other consultant." This was common. Catherine didn't just solve problems, she was a trophy. Having her name associated with a case meant status, meant you mattered enough to deserve the best. Clients begged, paid fortunes, just to say they had Catherine Mendez handling their image. Prepare the usual materials. Full profile, company history, clippings from the last 6 months, social media analysis. "Already done," Deborah smiled, handing over a digital folder. "And I added something I thought you'd like to see. His personal dossier is interesting." Catherine raised an eyebrow. Rarely did anything pique such interest in Deborah, who was almost as cool and methodical as she was. Opening the file on her tablet, Catherine understood why. Julian Alistair, 30 years old, degree in economics from Wharton and an MBA from Harvard, fluent in 5 languages, had never given an interview, had no social media profiles. The few available photos were from corporate events, always in the background, always observing. A ghost in the digital world. "They say he's some kind of prodigy," Deborah commented, "but they also say he's inexperienced." Inexperienced? Socially? Romantically? Deborah hesitated, searching for the right word. "A virgin, from what people say." Catherine laughed, a rare sound in her office. "A millionaire virgin at 30? That's fiction, Deborah." "That's what I thought, but 3 different sources mentioned it. He's never been seen with anyone. Never been any rumors of relationships, nothing. Maybe he's discreet, or maybe he has other interests. Either way," Deborah continued, "I found it curious, especially considering he requested you." Catherine closed the tablet. The idea was absurd but strangely intriguing. A man who commanded a financial empire but supposedly knew nothing about intimacy. A walking paradox. "The video conference starts in 5 minutes," Deborah reminded her, leaving the room. Alone, Catherine returned to the window. Her reflection in the glass returned her usual confident gaze. How long had it been since she'd felt the thrill of genuine curiosity, of anticipation? Her lovers, chosen with the same care as her Italian shoes, were predictable in their adoration and subsequent dismissal. Powerful men who turned into insecure boys in her hands. It was a game that had lost its charm. Perhaps Julian Alistair would be different. Perhaps he was exactly the kind of distraction she needed. The next morning, Catherine chose a less daring outfit than usual. A flawlessly tailored grey pantsuit, medium-heeled shoes, discreet makeup. If the air was as reserved as they said, an overly provocative look might push him away. The headquarters of Alistair Investments occupied the top floors of a mirrored skyscraper in downtown Miami, the kind of place that exuded power and tradition in every inch of its Italian marble and rich mahogany. At the reception, a middle-aged woman with a military posture greeted her. "Ms. Mendez, I'm Regina, Mr. Alistair's executive assistant. Please, follow me." Instead of heading to the boardroom on the executive floor, Regina led her to the private elevator that went to the penthouse. Julian's personal office, she explained, as she typed in an access code. The elevator opened directly into a space that looked more like a private library than a corporate office. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, antique globes, framed maps. In the background, enormous windows revealed a breathtaking view of Miami's historic downtown, and with his back to the door observing the landscape was a male figure. "Mr. Alistair, Ms. Mendez is here," Regina announced, discreetly withdrawing. When he turned, Catherine needed a second to readjust her expectations. She had imagined someone frail, awkward, with that look of discomfort typical of wealthy nerds. But Julian Alistair was tall, broad-shouldered, with a physique that suggested regular physical discipline. Dark hair cut in a classic style, tanned skin, and eyes. Eyes of such a deep brown they seemed almost black. "Ms. Mendez," he approached, extending his hand. His voice was deeper than she expected, measured, as if he weighed every word. "Thank you for coming in person." His handshake was firm, dry, precise, neither submissive nor dominant. The handshake of someone not trying to prove anything. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Alistair. Your company is a national institution." He indicated a set of armchairs near the window, where a low table was already set with water and coffee. As they walked, Catherine noticed he was observing her not with the typical male gaze of assessment, but like someone studying a complex text, analyzing, absorbing, comprehending. "You must be wondering why I insisted on hiring you personally," he began, sitting with a natural elegance. "I confess I am, especially considering your current crisis seems to be well managed." Julian poured water for both of them, an unusual gesture for an executive of his level. "Appearances, Ms. Mendez. The surface is calm, but there are dangerous currents beneath it. So it's not just the rumors about your father's health." Something crossed his face, a quick shadow, quickly controlled. "My father is recovering well, thank you for asking. But the crisis exposed weaknesses in our communication structure, and more importantly in how I am perceived." As the reclusive air, a subtle smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "So you've done your research." "I always do." "And what did you find?" Catherine crossed her legs, a move that usually drew gazes. Julian's eyes, however, remained fixed on her face. Impeccable education, discreet but efficient performance, virtually no public or social presence, an enigma in the corporate world, which is rare in these times of overexposure. "Superficial impressions but accurate," he agreed, leaning slightly forward. "The problem, Ms. Mendez, is that this discretion I've cultivated for years is now seen as weakness, insecurity. The shareholders want a charismatic leader, not an invisible administrator. They need to trust me, not just my skills. So you need a new public persona. I need strategic authenticity, to show who I am, but only enough to inspire confidence without compromising my privacy." Catherine analyzed him with renewed interest. Most clients wanted a complete transformation, a perfectly fitted mask. Julian seemed to be seeking something more subtle, a curated version of himself. "Interesting," she murmured. "And why me, specifically?" "There are executive coaching specialists who—" "Because you understand masks," he interrupted, with a smoothness that made the interruption almost unnoticeable. "You know the social games, the expectations, the pitfalls. You navigate them with the elegance of someone born to it." His words, spoken in a casual tone, hit her like an all-too-accurate analysis. How could he know so much about her, with just a few minutes of interaction? "Do you always conduct this kind of analysis on the professionals you hire, Mr. Alistair?" He stared at her for a long moment before answering. "Only those who truly interest me." It was in that moment that Catherine felt it, that subtle vibration, that electricity in the air that she normally controlled, now passing between them like a current independent of her will. A game was beginning, but for the first time in a long time she wasn't sure who had set the rules. "Should I assume I have the job then?" she asked, maintaining her professional composure. If you'll accept it. He stood up, walking to the nearest bookshelf. The contract includes a 6-month exclusivity. You would work directly with me, no intermediaries. That's unusual. So is the situation. He pulled a book from the shelf, flipping through it distractedly. I need someone who understands not just corporate image, but human behavior, desires, control. The last word hung in the air like a veiled challenge. What exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Alistair? He returned the book to the shelf, turned, and looked her directly in the eyes. To teach me how to be seen, Ms. Mendes, but only in the way I choose to be seen. Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine. With any other client, this would be just another professional request, but there was something in the way he watched her, as if he already knew every inch of her soul without ever having touched an inch of her skin. I think we can come to an agreement, she replied, rising as well. My assistant will send the terms over today. When she extended her hand for a final handshake, Julian took it between his for a second longer than necessary. Do you know what intrigues me most about you, Catherine? For the first time, he used her first name, making the moment strangely intimate. It's that behind all this flawless competence, there's someone deeply bored with the predictability you've built around yourself. He released her hand and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I think we'll work very well together. As the elevator doors closed, Catherine realized her breathing was slightly altered. In just one meeting, Julian Alistair had done what no man had managed in years. He had left her genuinely intrigued. And more dangerously than that, he had made her feel seen. Chapter 2. Role Reversal. In her second week of working with Julian Alistair, Catherine had already established a routine. Daily meetings in his office, always in the morning, always with an agenda meticulously planned by her. At first, everything followed the professional protocol she had mastered. Analysis of the company's digital presence, media training, interview simulations, planning strategic appearances. But there was something different about this client, something that challenged her in subtle and unexpected ways. I don't agree with this approach, Julian said, handing back the communication plan she had prepared. They were in the private meeting room of the penthouse, the two of them alone as usual. It's too standardized. It's a proven strategy, Catherine countered, feeling a twinge of irritation. We gradually build your presence, humanize your image with carefully selected personal stories, create points of identification with key audiences. And I become just another generic executive with a fabricated story of overcoming adversity and family values. He stood up, walking to the window that displayed downtown Miami in its morning bustle. It's not authentic. Authenticity is a construct like any other, Mr. Alistair. He turned, a half smile on his lips. Is that what you tell your lovers too? The question caught her completely off guard. In their 2 weeks of interaction, Julian had never crossed the line of professionalism. The mention of her personal life was as unexpected as it was inappropriate. I beg your pardon? She kept her tone neutral, but she felt her face flush slightly. Forgive the indiscretion. He returned to the table, showing no embarrassment. I just wonder if this philosophy of strategic masks extends to your private life. Catherine closed her document folder with a precise movement. My private life is not relevant to our contract, Mr. Alistair. On the contrary, he faced her with that unsettling intensity. You were hired for your expertise in perception and influence. How you navigate your own relationships is extremely relevant to understanding your methodology. His logic was impeccable and infuriating. Catherine felt cornered on her own turf. I keep my personal and professional lives strictly separate. She stood up, gathering her things. I suggest we do the same. Interesting. He leaned back in his chair. You've just confirmed my theory. What theory? That you apply the same control techniques in all spheres of your life. His eyes never left hers. You categorize people, manipulate expectations, maintain emotional distance. You're brilliant at what you do, but repetitive. Catherine felt as if he had read pages from her non-existent diary. The accuracy of the observation left her momentarily speechless, a rare condition for someone of her eloquence. Is this an image consultation or a therapy session, Mr. Alistair? She regained her composure, using sarcasm as a shield. It's a collaboration, Catherine. He used her first name again, creating that strange intimacy. And for it to work, we need to understand how each of us operates. Before she could respond, the door opened and Regina, his assistant, entered with a folder. The documents you requested, Mr. Alistair. She cast a curious glance at Catherine before withdrawing. The moment of tension had passed, but something had shifted in the air between them. A boundary had been tested, and Catherine wasn't sure if she was pleased or disturbed by the turn of the conversation. "Let's resume tomorrow," Julian suggested, as if nothing had happened. "I have an alternative proposal for the communication plan I'd like to present." She nodded professionally and left, feeling his eyes follow her every step to the door. The next day, Catherine arrived determined to re-establish control of the situation. She wore one of her most imposing pantsuits, hair pulled back in a severe bun, red lipstick, her full professional armor. To her surprise, she was not directed to the penthouse office. Regina led her to the building's helipad. "Mr. Alistair asked to meet you at another location," the assistant explained. "The pilot has the coordinates." 20 minutes later, the helicopter landed on the Alistair estate in the Florida Keys, a modernist mansion integrated into the lush landscape overlooking the sea. Julian was waiting for her on the helipad, dressed casually but elegantly, light linen trousers and a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "I hope you don't mind the change of scenery," he said, as he guided her along a stone path to the house. "I needed a different environment for our discussion today." The house was impressive, minimalist with enormous glass panels that framed the ocean. Contemporary American art decorated the open-plan living spaces. There were no visible staff, and the sense of isolation was both liberating and slightly intimidating. "My father built this 30 years ago," Julian explained, pouring lime-infused water for both of them on the veranda. "It was his refuge when he needed to think. Now it's mine." "It's stunning," Catherine admitted, watching the horizon where the blue of the sky merged with the sea. "But I confess I don't understand why our meeting had to be here. Because what I want to propose requires a departure from the corporate dynamic." He handed her a slim folder. "My counterplan." Inside were only a few pages. As she read, Catherine felt her professional interest heighten. Julian's approach was radically different from the traditional. Instead of building a charismatic public persona, he proposed a plan based on strategic rarity and intensive authenticity. Limited but high-impact public appearances, exclusive but deeply revealing interviews, a minimalist, yet meticulously curated digital presence. "You want to be the antidote to overexposure," she summarized, impressed. "To turn your reclusiveness into an asset, not a flaw." "Exactly." He sat near her. "In a world where everyone is desperate for attention, I want to be the one who gives it selectively. You create value through scarcity, not abundance. It's risky, counterintuitive. It's authentic to who I am." For the first time, she saw something like vulnerability in his eyes. "I can't become an extroverted, charismatic CEO overnight, but I can make my reserved nature work for me." Catherine closed the folder, genuinely intrigued. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity, and more disturbingly, it was something she might have conceived herself if she hadn't been so attached to her own proven methods. "Why bring me here to show me this? We could have discussed it in the office." Julian stood up, gesturing for her to follow. He led her down a side path from the house to an isolated studio, surrounded by tropical vegetation. "Because the second part of my proposal requires absolute privacy." Inside the studio, there was professional photography and video equipment. In the center, an intimate interview setup with 2 armchairs facing each other, soft lighting and discreet microphones. "I want you to interview me," he said. "No script, no pre-approved questions. A real conversation, recorded, which will be edited as exclusive material for key investors and strategic partners." "That's," she searched for the right word, "unexpected." Its calculated vulnerability. He approached the equipment, casually adjusting one of the lights. "I show that I have nothing to hide, but I control exactly what is seen and by whom." The idea was audacious and paradoxically aligned with the philosophy she herself preached, strategic authenticity. But there was an additional element that made her uncomfortable. "Why me as the interviewer? We should hire a respected journalist, someone with public credibility." "Because you'll ask me the questions that really matter." He turned to face her. "You're not interested in sound bites or headlines. You want to understand how I work, what drives me. Your curiosity about me is genuine. That can't be fabricated." His perception of her thoughts was disconcerting. Catherine felt exposed, as if he could read every unspoken reflection that passed through her mind. "And if I ask questions you don't want to answer? Then I will honestly state that I prefer not to answer." He smiled faintly. Or perhaps I'll answer more than you expect. There was an implicit challenge in his words, an invitation to a game of truth or consequences. Catherine realized she was being tested, but the exact nature of the test still eluded her. When do you want to do this? Now. He gestured to the armchairs. No preparation, no rehearsal. Just you and me, talking like adults. No technical crew? The equipment is programmed. I'm perfectly capable of operating a camera, Catherine. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. She should refuse. It was reckless, unprofessional, potentially disastrous. But the opportunity to finally unravel the enigma that was Julian Alistair was too tempting. Let's set some boundaries, she proposed, slipping into negotiator mode, topics that are completely off the table. As you wish, he nodded, but I ask for the same privilege. They sat facing each other. Julian adjusted the equipment with the ease of someone accustomed to technology, then took his seat. The soft light created an intimate, almost confessional atmosphere. Ready? He looked at her with a calm intensity. Yes. She crossed her legs, adjusted her posture. Where would you like to begin? You're the one asking the questions. He started the recording with a small remote control. I'm completely in your hands. The reversal of control was subtle but powerful. He was seemingly giving her the reins, but in doing so, he was defining the terms of the encounter. Catherine realized she would need to recalibrate her approach. Why did you really hire me, Julian? She deliberately dropped the formality. The real reason, not the corporate explanation. A slight smile appeared on his lips. Straight to the point. I like that. He paused, considering. I hired you because, among all the image specialists in the country, you're the only one who understands the true power of control, not just over others but over yourself. Explain. You command every room you enter, not just through your competence, but through your ability to reveal exactly what you want people to see, and nothing more. He leaned slightly forward. It's fascinating to watch you. The calibrated micro-expressions, the perfectly modulated body language. You've turned self-presentation into an art form. The analysis was so precise it bordered on discomfort. Catherine felt dissected. So I'm a case study. You're an inspiration. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. I need to learn what you've already mastered. How to show only what I want to show. Why? What are you hiding? His eyes darkened almost imperceptibly. It's not a matter of hiding, it's a matter of protecting. Protecting what? My core self. He paused meaningfully. My family believes that everything must be controlled. Information, appearances, emotions. My father built an empire by being hermetic. My grandmother built our family's reputation by being impenetrable. And you? I believe in selective control, in strategic vulnerability. He studied her with that penetrating gaze. In showing enough to be trusted, but saving the essential for those who deserve access. The conversation was taking an unexpectedly philosophical turn, but Catherine sensed there was more beneath the surface. Something personal, perhaps even painful. You mentioned your grandmother. Did she play an important role in your upbringing? A flash of surprise, the first genuinely uncalculated reaction she had seen from him. Yes. After my mother left us, when I was 5, it was my grandmother who essentially raised me. There was a studied neutrality in his voice. My father was busy building the empire. Left? You mean when she... Catherine hesitated, noticing the deliberate choice of words. When she chose to leave. Julian interrupted her softly. With her yoga instructor. For India. A dry smile appeared on his lips. My grandmother Helena removed every trace of her from our house within 24 hours. Portraits, clothes, gifts, everything was eliminated. As if she had never existed. The personal revelation surprised her. It was the first genuine crack in his perfectly controlled facade. That must have been difficult for a child. It was my first lesson in narrative control. His tone was almost casual, but his eyes revealed complexity. Helena taught me that the story we tell and the one we hide defines who we are to the world. There was so much to explore in that statement, but Julian smoothly took control of the conversation. My turn to ask. He watched her intently. What do you look for in the men you seduce and discard, Catherine? The question hit her like a precise blow. From a personal revelation of his to an invasion of her private life, the transition was so smooth she barely noticed the trap until she was in it. Is this relevant to your communication strategy? She tried to deflect, maintaining a professional smile. It's relevant to our understanding of each other. He held her gaze firmly. You asked a personal question. I answered. Now it's your turn. It was fair in a way, and something about the intimate atmosphere of that isolated studio made her usual defenses less accessible. Control, she admitted finally. As you yourself observed, I like to set the rules, define the boundaries, determine when it begins and when it ends. Chapter 3. Discoveries. And what happens when they discover they can't be controlled? Julian asked, his voice low in the silent Florida Key studio. Catherine hesitated. The interview had morphed into something very different from what she had planned. The cameras were still rolling, but the conversation no longer seemed to be about his public image. It was a mutual dissection, a dangerously honest exchange. They can always be controlled, she replied finally. It's just a matter of finding the right lever. Julian smiled as if he had confirmed something to himself. You really believe that? It's proven to be effective. Until you meet someone who doesn't respond to your levers. He turned off the cameras with a casual flick of the remote. Someone who sees the game you're playing. The air between them seemed to charge with electricity. Catherine felt strangely exposed, as if the turned-off cameras had, paradoxically, removed a layer of protection. That rarely happens, she maintained her composure, crossing her legs in a deliberate move. I imagine so. He stood up, walking to a small, built-in refrigerator. Wine? We're on the clock. We're in the Florida Keys, in a private home, having a conversation that transcended the professional about 20 minutes ago. He pulled out a bottle. I think we can allow ourselves a glass. He was right, and that irritated her. The boundaries of their relationship were blurred, and she couldn't pinpoint exactly when that had started to happen. Worse still, she wasn't sure if she wanted to re-establish those boundaries. One glass, she agreed. Julian poured 2 glasses of red wine, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed briefly during the transfer, an insignificant touch that nonetheless sent a subtle current up Catherine's spine. Cheers, he raised his glass in a silent toast, to unexpected revelations. They drank in silence, observing each other. The wine was exceptional, complex and full-bodied. 2010 Barolo, he commented, noticing her appreciation. My grandmother taught me to appreciate wine when I was 16, said it was part of a real man's education. Your grandmother seems to have had very specific ideas about what constitutes a real man. Oh, she has a complete manual. There was something bitter in his humor. Emotional control, iron discipline, calculated ambition, and of course the impeccable preservation of appearances. She wouldn't approve of this conversation then. She would consider it an unforgivable aberration. He took another sip. Or perhaps a brilliant strategic move depending on the final outcome. Catherine placed her glass on the side table. And what is the outcome you're hoping for, Julian? The question hung between them like a veiled offer. He studied her for a long moment before answering. Honesty, at least between the two of us. The simplicity of the answer disarmed her. She had expected an insinuation, perhaps even an advance. After all, they were alone in an isolated house, with wine and tension in the air. But what he offered was something rarer and potentially more dangerous. Transparency. Why me? Why not one of the many communication professionals available on the market? He smiled faintly. You're still trying to understand my motives. It's my job to understand motivations. No, your job is to shape perceptions. He placed his glass next to hers. I chose you because among all the experts in social masks, you're the only one who seems to live under the weight of her own perfection. The observation hit her like a small electric shock. That's presumptuous. It's accurate. He didn't back down. You've built a life of absolute control, Catherine. Professionally admired, emotionally distant, socially envied. Everything meticulously orchestrated. But have you ever wondered if the cost of that perfection is feeling perpetually isolated? Even, or especially, when you're with the men you seduce. His words touched something deep that Catherine kept carefully buried. The loneliness that accompanied her, even in moments of the greatest physical intimacy. The constant feeling of playing a role, even when she was supposedly being herself. You don't know me well enough to make those claims, she said, her voice softer than she intended. It doesn't take long to recognize familiar patterns. He leaned forward. Especially when you've spent a lifetime studying them. Is that what you do? Study people? It's a hobby, he replied with a calculated casualness. Observe, analyze, understand. Most people collect stamps or watch TV series. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, revealing a younger, more relaxed version of Julian. Maybe I'm not most people. That's becoming clear. They looked at each other for a long moment, the tension between them palpable but indefinable, not entirely professional, not explicitly personal. A new and dangerous territory. It's getting late, Catherine observed, breaking the silence. We should head back to Miami. Julian nodded. Regina has probably already arranged for the helicopter. On the flight back, sitting side by side in the cabin with noise-cancelling headphones, they remained silent. But something had fundamentally changed between them, a mutual recognition that their professional contract was just the surface of something more complex that was forming. The following week, Catherine kept their interactions strictly professional. Meetings at the office always with Regina or other aides present, discussions focused exclusively on communication strategy. Julian followed her lead, behaving like the model client, attentive, respectful, appropriately distant, but the gazes lingered. Long, intense, filled with unspoken things that seemed to accumulate in the space between them, like static electricity before a storm. On Friday, after a particularly successful meeting with the company's board, Julian invited her for coffee in his private office. For the first time that week, they would be alone again. The board unanimously approved our strategy, he commented as he poured coffee for both of them. You impressed them. We impressed them, she corrected. Your presentation was flawless. It was true. Julian had demonstrated a serene and authoritative presence that captured everyone's attention. Not too expansive, not too reserved, precisely calibrated to inspire confidence. Catherine felt a pang of professional pride watching him. I learned from the best. He handed her a cup. But you seem tense. Is something bothering you? Catherine hesitated. What bothered her was exactly what she couldn't say. That she thought constantly about their conversation in the Keys, that her mind repeatedly returned to his penetrating observations about her, that she found herself analyzing every interaction between them like a complex text in search of hidden meanings. I'm concerned about the next steps, she opted for the half-truth. The interview with Forbes will be crucial. It's your first significant exposure. The interview will be in writing with pre-approved questions, he reminded her. Hardly an insurmountable challenge. Still, we need to be meticulous. He studied her over the rim of his cup. You're avoiding me, Catherine. The directness caught her off guard. I'm keeping our relationship professional as it should be. As it should be, he repeated slowly, or as is more comfortable for you. She placed her cup on the table with more force than necessary. This is inappropriate. Setting boundaries again, he observed. It's your favorite defense mechanism. It's basic professional conduct. It's fear. The word hung between them like a challenge. Catherine felt her face heat up. I'm not afraid of you, Julian. Not of me, he corrected softly, of what we're creating together. This thing between us that doesn't fit into any of your neat categories. She should deny it, re-establish boundaries, end the conversation. Instead, she heard herself ask, and what exactly are we creating? I don't know yet, he answered with surprising honesty, but I know it's rare, and that we both feel it. Before she could respond, the intercom buzzed. Regina's voice informed them that the next meeting was about to begin. The moment passed, unresolved, leaving a current of tension suspended between them. Over the weekend, Catherine tried to distract herself. She accepted an invitation to a party at an old client's penthouse in Coconut Grove. The place was filled with beautiful and influential people, her natural habitat. She navigated the crowd with her usual elegance, chatting, laughing, making strategic connections. A recently divorced senator showed obvious interest, tall, attractive, with that polished charisma of an experienced politician, the kind of man who would normally fit perfectly into her routine of controlled seduction. She flirted out of habit, but her heart wasn't in it. Every interaction felt superficial, predictable. When he suggested they continue the evening at his apartment, she politely declined. For the first time in a long time, the idea of a casual encounter felt empty. Back in her own apartment later, she found herself reviewing the recordings from the interview in the Keys. Not the formal part, but the moments after, when they thought the cameras were off. Catherine had secretly kept the recording active, a professional habit to protect herself, to have material in case something went out of control. On the screen, she watched herself and Julian talking, drinking wine, exchanging glances. The chemistry between them was palpable even through the camera's cold lens. It was disconcerting to see herself like this, less calculated, more authentic. vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. On Monday, a surprise awaited her. Julian had unexpectedly traveled to Chicago, and Regina informed her that he would be away for a few days. He had left instructions for Catherine to continue the work with the communications team and prepare materials for his remote approval. His absence provoked a reaction Catherine didn't expect: disappointment. She had prepared for a confrontation, for the continuation of that interrupted conversation. His escape, because that's what it felt like, irritated her deeply. On the third day, with no direct news, only formal emails forwarded by Regina, Catherine decided to take action. After work, when the executive floor was nearly empty, she used her privileged access to enter Julian's private office. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. Perhaps a clue about his sudden absence, something to explain his behavior. Or maybe she just wanted to be in a space that held his essence. The office was impeccably organized, as one would expect. She scanned the bookshelves, the carefully arranged objects, antique globes, first editions of literary classics, small bronze sculptures. Each item seemed chosen not just for its aesthetic value, but for some personal meaning. Her gaze settled on a discreet photograph on a higher shelf. To her teenage Julian next to an elegant, austere woman, perfectly coiffed grey hair, impeccable posture, a penetrating gaze. Helena Alistair, Catherine presumed. The grandmother who raised him with an iron fist. Behind the main desk was a door she had never seen open. Without much thought, Catherine turned the knob. She was surprised to find it unlocked. It was a small adjoining office, very different from the main space. While the office where Julian received visitors was organized and immaculate, this one was more chaotic, more personal. A desk covered in books and papers, walls with mind maps and notes, shelves filled with notebooks. Catherine knew she should retreat. She was violating a client's privacy, crossing professional lines. But her curiosity was stronger. She approached the desk, observing the open books, treatises on psychology, neuroscience, studies on human behavior. A black-covered notebook caught her eye. It seemed more personal than the other materials. Hesitantly, she opened it. The first few pages contained structured observations about different people, some names she recognized as executives in the financial market, detailed analyses of behaviors, speech patterns, emotional reactions. It was almost scientific in its precision. As she turned the pages, Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine. There was her own name, heading several pages of meticulous notes. Catherine Mendes, Patterns of Emotional and Interpersonal Control, the title read. Below, dated observations from long before they had formally met, references to events where they had both been present, analyses of her behavior in social situations, even mentions of some of her previous public relationships. Her breathing quickened. The notes were disturbingly accurate, dissecting her defense mechanisms, her manipulation techniques, her patterns of emotional approach and withdrawal. It was as if he had studied her for years, cataloguing every aspect of her personality. One particular passage made her freeze. Primary vulnerability, fear of abandonment underlying control behavior, discards partners before they can reject her, maintains relationships on her terms as a form of protection. Paradox, the more control she exerts, the more isolated she becomes. Potential for genuine connection exists, but is blocked by layers of self-preservation. The words hit her like a physical blow. It was painfully true, an analysis that not even her therapists had articulated with such precision. How could he know this? How could he see so deeply through the layers of protection she had built over years? Turning a few more pages, she found something even more disturbing. A plan, meticulously laid out, with dates, steps, contingencies. A plan for her, to get to know her, to work with her, to emotionally disarm her. The title at the top of the page was unequivocal: The Catherine Mendes Approach, a Progressive Engagement Strategy. The door to the main office opened, and Catherine heard footsteps. In a panic, she closed the notebook and placed it back where she had found it. There was no time to leave the adjoining office without being seen. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard in the silent room. "I knew I'd find you here," Julian's voice came from the doorway of the annex. She turned slowly, her face a mask of forced composure. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. Not anger, not surprise, but something more complex. She started but stopped. There was no acceptable explanation. "You were doing exactly what I would do," he completed, stepping into the small office. seeking information, trying to understand. He didn't seem the least bit disturbed to find her invading his most private space. In fact, there was something in his expression that suggested he had anticipated this. "What is this?" She pointed to the notebook, abandoning any pretense of innocence. "Why do you have notes about me that predate our meeting?" Julian approached slowly until he was just a few feet away. "Because you've fascinated me, Catherine. For years. That's disturbing. It's honest." He held her gaze. "I could lie, invent some explanation that sounds less intense. But I promised honesty between us. You studied me like, what, a project? An experiment? Like someone I recognized." His voice was soft, almost gentle, like a kindred spirit trapped in her own cage of perfection. Catherine felt torn between anger and a strange sense of recognition. Part of her wanted to flee, to terminate the contract, to never see Julian Allister again. Another part, a part that was growing with every second, felt intensely drawn to this unusual connection, to this man who seemed to see her in a way no one else did. "Why hire me?" she asked, her voice firmer. "Why bring me close, if you already knew so much about me?" "Because knowing about you and knowing you are completely different things." He took another step forward. "Because theories need to be tested in reality, and because—" He hesitated for the first time since entering the office. There was genuine vulnerability in his eyes when he continued. "Because I've spent years observing people from a distance, understanding them without connecting, and I finally found someone worth the risk of getting closer." Chapter 4. A tenuous balance. Julian's confession hung in the air between them like an offer, dangerous, irresistible. Catherine stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation, but found only a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own confusion. "This isn't normal," she said finally, her voice calmer than she expected. "Studying someone like this, documenting their patterns as if they were a specimen. It isn't normal," he agreed. "Just as it isn't normal the way you calculate every gesture, every word, every interaction. We are exceptionally non-normal people, Catherine." There was a painful truth in that which she couldn't deny. Her entire life had been built around meticulous control, precise observation, and the strategic manipulation of perceptions. Who was she to judge his methods of observation when her own methods of interaction were just as calculated? "We should terminate our contract," she said, more as a question than a statement. "Is that what you want?" The question was simple, but the answer was not. Professionally, the situation had crossed every imaginable line of ethical conduct. Personally was where the confusion reigned. The connection between them was undeniable. Disturbing, yes, but also intoxicating in its intensity. "I don't know what I want," Catherine admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "This is new to me." Julian nodded, understanding perfectly. Uncharted territory for both of us. The silence between them stretched, charged with possibilities. Finally, Julian took a step back, creating space between them. "I will respect whatever decision you make," he said. "If you want to end our contract, I'll understand. If you want to continue on a strictly professional basis, I will adapt my approach." "Or she heard herself ask against all better judgment. "Or we can explore this," he gestured between them, "whatever this is, with honesty, without games, at least not between us." The proposal was both tempting and terrifying. Catherine felt as if she were on the edge of a cliff, knowing that any choice would irrevocably change the course of her life. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course." He showed no disappointment, only acceptance. "We have time." She left the office feeling strangely light and completely disoriented at the same time. The discovery should have enraged her, should have made her run in the opposite direction. Instead, she felt almost relieved, as if a complex game had been called off, allowing for something more authentic in its place. That night, in her Coconut Grove apartment, Catherine couldn't sleep. She replayed every interaction with Julian in the new light of her discoveries. Had she been manipulated? Or paradoxically, was this the most honest interaction she had ever had with anyone? The next morning she sent a simple text. "Can we talk? Not at the office." The reply came almost immediately. "My apartment, 8 p.m. Address to follow." The day dragged on in a haze of automatic meetings and mechanical decisions. At 8 p.m. sharp, Catherine found herself at the door of an apartment in Coral Gables. Not an ostentatious penthouse as one would expect from the heir to a financial empire, but an elegant apartment in a discreet building. Julian opened the door wearing jeans and a simple white shirt, the most casual she had ever seen him. The apartment behind him was surprisingly welcoming. Books in abundance, comfortable furniture, large windows open to the evening breeze. None of the cold corporate minimalism she had expected. "Welcome to my real home," he said, leading her inside. "Few people know this place. It's not what I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "Something more calculated, impersonal." He smiled. "Like my office? That's a facade. This," he gestured around the space, "is where I actually live." There was something deeply intimate about being there, even more so than in his private office. This was the real Julian, not the public persona or even the reserved executive. It was the man behind all the layers. "Wine?" he offered, walking to the open-plan kitchen. "Please." As he poured the glasses, Catherine observed the room. Framed photos showed places, not people. Mountains, deserted beaches, dense forests. An entire wall of books was organized not by appearance, but clearly by frequent use. Worn spines, bookmarks in the pages. "You really live here alone?" "No staff. I have a cleaner who comes twice a week," he replied, handing her a glass. "I prefer my private space to be truly private." They sat on a comfortable leather sofa, a respectful distance between them. "I've made a decision," Catherine began after a sip of wine. "I'm listening. I want to continue working with you." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "Professionally, there's still a lot to do with your communication strategy. And personally—" "Yes?" There was a softness in his voice that encouraged her. "Personally, I'm intrigued." Disturbed, confused, but undeniably intrigued. She looked him directly in the eyes. "I've never met anyone who saw me so clearly. It's terrifying and liberating in a strange way." "I know exactly what you mean." He placed his glass on the coffee table. "From our first formal meeting, I felt you could see past my layers too. That's why I kept you at a distance for so long. Observing but never getting close." "What changed?" "My father." The mention caused a slight shift in his expression. "When he fell ill, I realized how life can change in an instant. All the carefully laid strategies, all the meticulously built defenses, none of it matters when you confront your own finality." Catherine nodded, understanding. There was a gravity in his words that resonated with something inside her. "So what are we proposing here?" she asked, placing her glass next to his. "What kind of arrangement would this be? Professional with something more?" "I propose honesty," he replied simply. "We continue our work, which benefits both of us professionally. And in parallel, we explore this connection without predefined labels, without imposed expectations, just discovering what it is at a comfortable pace." It was a surprisingly sensible proposal from a man who had meticulously documented her behavioral patterns before even meeting her. "On one condition," she added, "no more secret studies. No notes about me that I can't see." "Fair." He looked at her intently. "And in return I ask the same. No calculated manipulations, no testing boundaries for your own study." She felt exposed again. He really did know her well. "We have a deal then." She extended her hand formally, an almost comical action given the intimacy of the conversation. Julian smiled, taking her hand. But instead of shaking it, he turned it gently and brought it to his lips, kissing her wrist softly. The gesture, so old-fashioned and yet so intimate, sent a wave of heat up Catherine's arm. "Deal sealed," he murmured, still holding her hand. The moment stretched between them, the tension building. It would be so easy to lean forward, to close the distance, to succumb to the attraction that pulsed between them. But Julian gently released her hand and leaned back on the sofa. "Slowly," he said, almost to himself. "We have time." His restraint surprised her and paradoxically intensified her desire. She was used to men who pounced at the first sign of interest, who tried to prove their masculinity through immediate conquest. Julian's deliberate patience was disconcerting and undeniably attractive. They talked for hours after that, about everything and nothing. Books, movies, travel, philosophy. The ease of the conversation was surprising, flowing naturally between deep and mundane topics. It was almost as if they were old friends, except for the electric current of attraction that never fully subsided. When Catherine finally left, it was well past midnight. At the door, he held her gaze for a long moment. "Good night, Catherine." His voice was low, almost intimate. "Good night, Julian," she replied, resisting the urge to lean into him. In the taxi home, she realized she had spent hours without calculating a single gesture, without measuring a single word. The feeling was as rare as it was precious. In the weeks that followed, they established a curious routine, days spent in intense professional collaboration, preparing Julian for interviews, refining his public presence, carefully managing his media exposure. Occasional evenings at his apartment, talking late into the night, slowly exploring the connection between them. The work thrived. The calculated scarcity strategy was working perfectly. Each limited appearance by Julian generated intense interest. Forbes published a profile describing him as the most fascinating enigma in the American financial market, discreet but profound, reserved but impactful. Their personal dynamic evolved at a deliberately slow pace. There were no passionate kisses, no dramatic advances. Just a gradual deepening of intimacy, fingers that brushed when passing objects, gazes that lasted longer than necessary, conversations that ventured into increasingly personal territories. On one of those evenings, sitting on his apartment balcony with the sea breeze and the distant sound of Coral Gables traffic, Catherine asked what had been puzzling her for weeks. "Why the wait, Julian? I know you desire me, and you know I desire you too." He considered the question, looking out at the illuminated city below. "Because what we're building is too rare to be rushed," he answered finally. "Because every time I wait, every time I choose not to take the easy path, I'm exercising a kind of agency that was denied to me for a long time." "How so?" He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the soft light. "My grandmother Helena controlled every aspect of my life. What I wore, who I spoke to, how I behaved. Every natural desire was analyzed, judged, and usually suppressed. 'Control your impulses or they will control you,' she would say. It sounds suffocating. It was. My sexual education, if you can call it that, consisted of being warned about the dangers of letting carnal desires cloud one's judgment." A sad smile crossed his face. "Women were presented as potential distractions from greatness, emotional traps that could destroy the family legacy." Catherine felt a pang of anger for the woman who had twisted something as natural as human desire. "So you chose abstinence as a rebellion. I chose intention over impulse, connection over consumption." He took her hand, tracing light patterns on her palm. "When I finally decided to explore intimacy, I wanted it to be on my terms, not hers or the terms society imposes on men." The explanation touched her deeply. There was an unusual courage in his approach, a refusal to follow pre-established scripts of masculinity or romance. "And that's why you watched me for so long before approaching?" "In part," he admitted. "I wanted to understand you before making myself vulnerable. But I was also learning how approach works, how authentic connection develops. I had no healthy models for that in my upbringing." It was a confession so honest that Catherine felt her own emotional armor crack a little more. "I think I understand," she said softly. "Observation as study, as preparation." "Exactly. Though I admit I went too far with the notes." He smiled faintly. "A bit obsessive." "A bit," she agreed, returning the smile. They fell silent for a moment, hands still intertwined. "We're creating our own model here, aren't we?" she reflected. "Something that doesn't follow the normal rules." "Yes. And I like that." The following week, the first major test of their communication strategy arrived. Julian was invited to a high-level economic panel, broadcast live. It was his first truly public appearance since taking control of the company. Catherine helped him prepare meticulously, but on the day of the event, sitting in the front row of the auditorium, she felt an anxiety that wasn't purely professional. She cared about the outcome on a personal level that surpassed any contract. When Julian took the stage, his presence immediately captured the audience's attention. Not for the expansive charisma typical of CEOs, but for a rarer quality. A quiet confidence, a complete attention to the present moment. When he spoke, his words were measured, substantial, without unnecessary flourishes. When he listened, he did so completely, without the performative impatience common in executives. One particular moment made an impact. When one of the other panelists, an economist known for his aggressive style, tried to interrupt him, Julian simply paused, looked him directly in the eye and said, "I am listening to your perspective with attention. I ask for the same courtesy." The tone was not confrontational but firm. The entire room seemed to freeze, and the interrupter backed down. At the end of the panel, the buzz was audible. Julian Alistair had made a powerful impression precisely by not trying to impress. His controlled authenticity, the strategy they had devised together, worked perfectly. Backstage, Catherine found him surrounded by journalists and other participants, all eager for a moment of his attention. He treated them with courtesy, but his eyes searched for and found hers in the crowd. A small private smile passed between them, acknowledgement of a job well done, but also something more personal. Later, when they finally got a moment alone in the VIP lounge, she couldn't contain her enthusiasm. "You were exceptional," she said, her eyes shining. "Exactly the right measure of authority and accessibility." "I had an excellent teacher," he replied, moving closer. The energy between them had subtly shifted. The public success, the adrenaline of the moment, the validation of their shared strategy. It all combined to intensify the attraction that had been slowly growing between them. "Julian," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I think—" The door opened abruptly, and an elegant, austere figure entered the room. Catherine recognized her immediately from the photographs. Helena Alistair, the matriarch, Julian's grandmother. At 75, she moved with the precision of someone decades younger, silver hair in an impeccable bun, military posture. "An impressive performance, Julian," she said, completely ignoring Catherine's presence. "Finally taking your proper place in the business world." Instantly, Catherine watched the transformation in Julian. His posture shifted subtly, his face taking on a studied neutrality. It was like watching someone put on invisible armor. "Grandmother," he replied with formal politeness. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Clearly." Her eyes finally turned to Catherine, assessing her from head to toe with a clinically cold gaze. "This must be your image consultant." The way she pronounced the title made it clear she considered the role trivial, perhaps even slightly vulgar. "Catherine Mendez," Julian made the introductions. "Catherine, this is my grandmother, Helena Alistair." Catherine extended her hand professionally. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Alistair. Your grandson is an exceptional client." Helena shook her hand briefly without warmth. "I imagine he is. He was always exceptionally obedient." There was something icy in her smile. "When he decides to follow instructions." The comment carried layers of meaning Catherine couldn't fully decipher, but she noticed the slight tensing in Julian's shoulders. "I was just congratulating your grandson on his excellent performance today." Catherine maintained her professional tone, instinctively sensing that this woman was a formidable adversary. "Yes, he finally seems to be embracing his responsibilities." Helena placed a hand on Julian's arm, not a gesture of affection, but of possession. "We need to talk about the charity gala next week, dear. There are important details about your participation." "We can discuss that tomorrow at the office," Julian replied, his voice neutral. "I'd prefer now. In private." Helena's glance at Catherine made the meaning clear. For a moment, Catherine saw Julian hesitate, as if he were about to refuse. Then, almost imperceptibly, he yielded. "Catherine, can we continue our discussion tomorrow?" She nodded professionally, recognizing the complexity of the situation. "Of course. We already have much to celebrate today." As she left the room, she felt Helena's gaze following her, calculating, appraising. The message was clear. Territories were marked, and she was being seen as an intruder. The next day, Julian was strangely distant during their regular meeting. The professional formalities had returned, the personal warmth they had been cultivating seeming temporarily inaccessible. Only when Regina left to fetch some documents did he briefly let his guard down. "Sorry about yesterday," he said in a low voice. "Helena has a talent for showing up at the most inopportune moments. She seems intense." Catherine chose her words carefully. "She's a force of nature." There was a complexity in his expression, respect, fear, resentment, all mixed together. "And she has just decided that you are an unwelcome complication." "For the company's image?" "For me." His eyes met hers with intensity. "She has an infallible radar for emotional connections she can't control." The admission that there was an emotional connection between them hung in the air. Before they could explore it further, Regina returned, and Julian's professional mask slipped back into place. That evening, Catherine received a message from him. "Sorry for the distance today. Can we meet at the apartment at 9 p.m? We need to talk." The formal tone of the message worried her. Something had changed, and she suspected Helena's appearance was at the center of it. At 9 p.m. sharp, She knocked on the door of the Coral Gables apartment. Julian opened it, looking tired but determined. "Helena wants me to terminate your contract," he said without preamble, as soon as he closed the door behind her. Catherine felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with professional concerns. "And what do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Julian looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I want her to stop trying to control my life. I want to set my own boundaries, make my own choices." He took a step toward her. "And more than anything right now, Catherine, I want you." Chapter 5. Revelations and Risks. Continuation. Catherine's stomach sank. The hesitation in Julian's response said a lot. Was he really considering giving in to his grandmother's demands? "I understand," she replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the sudden pang of hurt she felt. "It's a delicate situation." "Catherine," there was anguish in his voice, "it's not what you're thinking. I need time to devise a counterattack. Helena expects me to surrender immediately, as I always have. I need a strategy." "I'm not the one you need to convince, Julian." She tried to sound rational, professional, despite the vulnerability she felt. "It's a sensible business decision. Your position as CEO is more important than whatever this is between us." "Don't do that," he said, his voice suddenly firm. "Don't retreat into your distant analytical mode. Not now. I'm being realistic. You're protecting yourself, putting up emotional distance before I even have a chance to disappoint you." He sighed deeply. "It's exactly what Helena expects us to do, to turn on each other under pressure." The observation struck her with its accuracy. It was exactly what she was doing, retreating to safe, familiar territory at the first real threat to the vulnerability she had allowed. "What do you suggest, then?" she asked, softening her tone. "Come over now." "Julian, if we're under surveillance, I don't care. In fact, I want her to see. I want her to understand that I'm not going to hide." The determination in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the cautious, calculating man who planned every move. This was someone willing to take a risk, to expose himself. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she decided. When she arrived at his apartment, Julian was waiting at the door. Without a word, he pulled her inside and held her in a tight embrace, as if afraid she might disappear. There was an urgency in his hug that communicated more than words ever could. "I'm sorry about this," he said finally, still holding her, "for dragging you into this dysfunctional family war." "You didn't drag me anywhere," she replied, pulling back just enough to look him in the eye. "I came of my own free will." They moved to the living room, sitting side by side on the sofa. Julian looked exhausted, lines of tension on his normally composed face. "Helena won't stop," he said, running his hands through his hair. "She's dedicated her entire life to shaping the Alistair image and legacy. In her view, I'm threatening decades of meticulous work. By getting involved with your image consultant, by acting independently, by making decisions based on personal desire instead of strategic calculation." He took her hand. "And more fundamentally, by connecting with someone emotionally. Helena believes emotional bonds are vulnerabilities to be avoided at all costs." "She sounds like an extreme version of both of us," Catherine observed with sad irony. "Exactly. That's why she's so dangerous. She understands our defense mechanisms perfectly. She knows exactly which buttons to push." He squeezed her hand. "But there's a fundamental difference between us and Helena." "What's that?" "We're trying to grow beyond our defenses. She has built her entire life around them." The observation hung between them, heavy with meaning. It was true. In recent months, both Catherine and Julian had been working, hesitantly but steadily, to dismantle the barriers they had erected around their hearts. "So what do we do?" she asked. "I have two options," he replied, turning to face her completely. "The first is the safest. Terminate your contract officially, but keep our relationship an absolute secret until I've consolidated my position at the helm and can confront Helena openly." "And the second?" "The second is riskier, but potentially more effective in the long run. Confront Helena directly. Refuse to give in to blackmail. Take the matter to the board before she does, framed on our terms." Catherine considered the options, analyzing them with the same precision she applied to professional strategies. "The first option protects your position, but keeps us on the defensive. Helena will always have that power over you, over us." She paused, thinking. "The second is professionally risky, but it cuts the problem off at the root." "Exactly my analysis," he agreed. "But there's something you're not considering." "What?" "The impact on your professional reputation. Confronting this openly means exposing our relationship. At the very least, it will raise questions about professional ethics. In the worst-case scenario, it could seriously damage your consultancy. She hadn't ignored that factor. She had just considered it less important than it truly was. It was a sign of how her priorities had shifted in recent months. Before, her professional reputation would have been the primary concern. Now it seemed secondary to the relationship they were building. "It's a risk I'm willing to take," she decided, surprising herself with her own certainty. Julian studied her, as if trying to gauge her sincerity. "Are you sure? You've built your career so carefully. I'll rebuild it if I have to." She leaned forward, cupping his face in her hands. "Some things are worth the risk, Julian." Something in his eyes softened, a tension of years finally giving way. He pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that communicated everything words could not. That night, their intimacy had a different quality, deeper, more present, with the urgency of those who know they are on the verge of a precipice and choose to jump anyway. In the morning, they devised a plan. Julian would schedule an extraordinary board meeting for the following day. Before that, he would confront Helena directly, not with anger or accusations, but with clear determination. Catherine would prepare a formal report on the positive results of her consultancy, including media metrics and market analyst feedback, building a strong case for her professional value regardless of any personal relationship. "There's one thing we need to discuss," Julian said as they had coffee. "The formal contract between us." Catherine nodded. "Technically, we are in breach of the confidentiality and professional conduct terms. The cleanest solution would be to officially terminate the contract," he suggested. "Not because Helena demands it, but because it's the right professional decision at this point. Your work is pretty much done anyway. You've taken to your public presence masterfully," she agreed. "My contractual objectives have been met. Then it's settled. We terminate the contract upon satisfactory completion, not under external pressure." He took her hand across the table. "And then we can move forward. In a different way." The "in a different way" hung between them, full of unarticulated possibilities. That afternoon, as Catherine worked in her Brickell office, she received a message from Julian. Conversation with Helena complete. As expected, it was not pleasant. Board meeting confirmed for tomorrow 9 a.m. "Are you ready for this?" She replied simply, "I am." What she didn't say was how strangely light she felt, almost euphoric, despite the impending crisis. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, she was prioritizing an emotional connection over calculated professional considerations. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That evening, Deborah entered her office with a worried expression. "There's someone here to see you," she said, visibly uncomfortable. "Helena Alistair." Catherine felt her stomach drop, but kept her face composed. "Send her in." Helena entered like a contained force of nature, elegant, dignified, and vibrating with a cold energy that seemed to lower the room's temperature. Dressed in a pearl grey silk suit, hair impeccably styled, she looked like the personification of aristocratic control. "Ms. Mendes," she greeted coldly, declining the offered seat. "I believe we can dispense with the formalities. I am here to offer an alternative to the disaster my grandson seems determined to precipitate." Catherine maintained her professional composure. "Please continue." Helena placed an envelope on the desk. "An offer. Your contract will be terminated with all payments due, plus a generous compensation for the early termination. In return, you sign a reinforced non-disclosure agreement and, more importantly, sever all personal ties with Julian." The directness of the proposal was almost admirable in its audacity. Catherine opened the envelope, briefly examining the terms. The generous compensation was indeed an impressive sum, enough to significantly expand her consultancy, or even allow for a sabbatical if she wished. "Why are you offering me this?" she asked, placing the documents back in the envelope. "If you're so confident in your position, you could simply follow through with your threats to the board." A thin, calculated smile appeared on Helena's lips. "Because I am practical, Miss Mendes. Scandals are messy and unpredictable. This solution is clean and final. And why do you think I would accept? Because you, like me, are a pragmatic survivor." Helena tilted her head slightly, studying her. "You have built your life and career on control and calculation. You know how to recognize when it is time for a strategic retreat." The characterization was disturbingly accurate, or it would have been a few months ago. Catherine realized with sudden clarity how much she had changed, how Julian had changed them. And if I refuse, then the consequences will be inevitable. Helena's voice remained calm, almost gentle, which made it all the more menacing. Your professional reputation will suffer significant damage. Julian's career will be harmed at its most crucial moment, and all for a fleeting emotional whim. Catherine kept her eyes fixed on Helena's, seeing in them not just calculating coldness, but something deeper, fear. Not fear of scandal or public embarrassment, but fear of losing control over the grandson she had so carefully molded. "Thank you for the offer, Mrs. Alistair," she said finally, pushing the envelope back across the desk. "But I will have to decline." A shadow of genuine surprise crossed Helena's perfectly composed face, briefly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely there. "That is disappointing," she replied, recovering quickly. "I thought you, of all people, would understand the value of self-preservation." "I understand it perfectly." Catherine stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "That's why I'm refusing." Helena studied her for a long moment before picking up the envelope. "Do you really believe you know my grandson better than I, who raised him from childhood?" "No," Catherine answered honestly. "I believe we are both getting to know a version of him that is just beginning to emerge. The difference is, you fear that version. I admire it." Something indefinable flashed in the older woman's eyes, perhaps recognition, perhaps reluctant respect. Without another word, Helena turned on her heel and left, her posture as rigid and impeccable as when she had entered. As soon as the door closed, Catherine felt her legs weaken. She sank into her chair, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had just refused a financially lucrative and professionally safe way out. She had just defied one of the most powerful and ruthless women in Miami, and strangely, despite the imminent danger, she felt more alive than she had in years. She picked up her phone, quickly typing a message to Julian. "Helena was here, offered a deal. I refused." The reply came almost immediately. "She visited me too. Tried a different approach, family guilt, threatened legacy. I also refused. I'm proud of us." Those simple words, "I'm proud of us," stirred an emotion Catherine barely recognized. It wasn't just satisfaction or relief, but something deeper, more fundamental, a feeling of belonging, of genuine partnership. The next day at 9 a.m. sharp, Catherine entered the boardroom of Alistair Investments. Julian was already there, speaking quietly with a few board members. When he saw her, a brief but genuine smile lit up his face before he returned to his professional expression. Most surprising, however, was the presence of Helena seated at the table with an impassive expression. Catherine had expected her to boycott the meeting as a silent protest. Her presence suggested the confrontation would be more direct than anticipated. The meeting began with the usual formalities: approval of the previous minutes, brief financial updates. Finally, Julian took the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I have called this extraordinary meeting to address a matter that may affect the perception of our company's governance. As you know, we hired Ms. Catherine Mendez as a strategic communications consultant following my father's hospitalization to assist with the leadership transition." He paused, looking directly at each board member before continuing. "Ms. Mendez's work has been exemplary, as demonstrated by the media reports and the stabilization of our stock value. However, I must inform you that over the course of this professional period, we have also developed a personal relationship." A murmur went through the room. Helena remained completely still, only her eyes betraying a cold intensity. "To avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest, we have decided to formally terminate the consulting contract, which has already fulfilled its primary objectives. Ms. Mendez has prepared a final report detailing the results achieved, which has been distributed to you all." One of the oldest board members, Paul Montgomery, raised his hand. "Julian, we appreciate your transparency, but why bring this to the board? Personal relationships are not typically a matter for this table." Before Julian could answer, Helena spoke, her voice controlled but cutting. "Because my grandson knows I plan to bring the matter to the board's attention anyway. He is attempting to control the narrative." All eyes turned to her, some surprised by the frankness of her statement. "That's true, grandmother," Julian replied calmly, "as it's also true that you hired a private investigator to follow and photograph us, in a clear invasion of privacy." Another murmur, more intense this time, rippled through the room. Helena did not flinch. I did what was necessary to protect this company and our family from a potentially disastrous error in judgment. And that is precisely why we are all here, Julian continued, still maintaining his composure. So that the board can hear directly, without intermediaries or manipulation, the full situation and draw its own conclusions. For the next hour, both Julian and Catherine presented their version of events with professional clarity. Helena interjected occasionally, always with sharp but formally correct observations. The board listened attentively, asking pointed questions. Finally, the chairwoman of the board, a senior executive from the financial market named Frances Randall, took the floor. I thank everyone involved for their transparency. From a corporate governance standpoint, I see no formal issues, especially with the termination of the professional contract. She looked directly at Helena. As for Mrs. Alistair's conduct in hiring a private investigator without company authorization, that will be discussed in a separate session. Helena held her gaze without blinking, but a slight tension in her jaw betrayed her discomfort. I consider this matter closed for the purposes of this meeting, Frances concluded. Mr. Alistair's personal life, as long as it does not negatively affect the company, remains precisely that, personal. When the meeting was formally adjourned, Helena was the first to leave, without a word to anyone. The other board members gradually departed, some stopping to speak briefly with Julian or greet Catherine. When they were finally alone in the room, Julian let out a long, deep sigh. That was intense, Catherine completed, allowing herself to relax for the first time in hours. But successful, I'd say. He approached, still maintaining a professional distance, aware of the glass walls. Helena didn't expect a public confrontation. She operates best in the shadows. What happens now? Now? A tired but genuine smile appeared on his face. Now we're free to discover what we really want. Without contracts, without secrets, without Helena's shadow. The simplicity of the statement carried enormous weight. Freedom, a concept they had both sacrificed in the name of control and emotional security for so long. That's scary, Catherine admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Completely terrifying, Julian agreed, his smile widening. And absolutely necessary. That afternoon, as Catherine organized the final contract termination documents in her office, Deborah entered with a confused expression. There's a call for you, she said hesitantly. From New York, a global public relations firm, Madison & Hayes. Apparently they want to discuss an offer. Catherine frowned, intrigued. Madison & Hayes was one of the largest firms in the world, known for working only with Fortune 500 corporations and high-profile public figures. Put them through, she requested, curious. The call was brief, but impactful. The director of international operations at Madison & Hayes was looking for someone to lead their new Latin American division, based in New York. Catherine's name had come up as an ideal candidate, especially after the impressively discreet and effective work with the transition at Alistair Investments. We would need an answer within the next 2 weeks, the executive explained. The position would start in 1 month with full relocation to New York. Catherine thanked her for the interest, promising to seriously consider the proposal. When she hung up, she stared at the phone, a mixture of emotions washing over her. It was the professional opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of position she would have accepted without hesitation just a few months ago. The chance to expand internationally, to work with global profile clients, to elevate her career to a whole new level. And yet, her first reaction was not pure excitement, but a complex conflict. New York meant leaving Miami. It meant leaving Julian, or asking him to abandon everything to follow her. Both options seemed impossible. She picked up the phone to call him, then hesitated. This was not the kind of conversation that should happen over the phone. They needed to be face-to-face. As she packed up her things, preparing to leave, Catherine realized she was facing the greatest possible test of whatever they were building. It wasn't Helena's threats or the board's pressure, but something much more fundamental. The collision between professional ambition and emotional connection. Between the life she had always planned and the possibility she had only just begun to glimpse. And for the first time, she had no idea which choice she would make. Chapter 6, Choices and Consequences. Catherine swirled the red wine in her glass, watching the liquid create small vortexes against the crystal. From the balcony of her Coconut Grove apartment, the sunset painted the horizon in shades of orange and pink, the beach below gradually emptying. It was her favorite view, the Miami she loved preparing for the night. On her coffee table, the contract from Madison and Hayes lay waiting, impeccably printed, its terms more generous than any she had ever seen in her career. Beside it, her cell phone remained silent. She had called Julian earlier, asking him to come over for an important conversation. He would arrive any moment. The intercom buzzed, announcing his arrival. Catherine took a deep breath, steeling herself. For the 3 days since she had received the offer, she had analyzed the situation from every possible angle, searching for the perfect rational solution to a problem that, for the first time, seemed to resist pure rationality. When Julian walked in, his smile faded as he saw her serious expression and the documents on the table. "What is it?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "I received a job offer," she answered directly. "Madison and Hayes, New York, to head their Latin American division." Julian stood still for a moment, absorbing the information. Then slowly he sat on the sofa across from her. "That's an incredible opportunity," he said finally, his voice deliberately neutral. "Exactly the kind of position you've always aimed for." "Yes." When would it start?" "In a month. Full relocation." She placed her glass on the table, looking him straight in the eye. "I have to give them an answer next week." The silence between them was charged with all the unspoken implications. New York meant 4,800 miles of distance. It meant choosing between career and relationship, the classic dilemma Catherine had always sworn she would never face, always believing she could control her life enough to avoid it. "What do you want to do?" Julian asked, his voice gentle. The seemingly simple question contained so many layers. What did she want professionally, personally, in the short term, in the long term? Her entire adult life, Catherine had made decisions based on cold calculations of advantage and progress. Now, for the first time, her heart and mind seemed to be at open war. "I don't know," she admitted, the words almost painful in their honesty. "It's everything I've ever worked for. The international recognition, the global platform, the expansion of my professional influence. But," he prompted softly, sensing the implicit hesitation, "but I never planned for you." She looked at him directly. "I never planned that I might want something that would compete so directly with my professional ambition." Julian absorbed her words with a thoughtful expression. "It shouldn't be a competition. I never wanted to be an obstacle to your dreams. It's not a matter of an obstacle. It's a matter of mutually exclusive choices." He stood up, walking to the balcony, looking out at the city that was slowly lighting up under the darkening sky. Catherine watched him, admiring the line of his shoulders, the posture that communicated both strength and vulnerability. "What if they weren't exclusive?" he asked finally, turning to face her. "What do you mean?" "Long-distance relationships exist, Catherine. Technology exists. Airplanes exist." She shook her head slowly. "We're too realistic to believe that would work. Not for us, not with our schedules, our personalities. Maybe." He came back, sitting beside her this time. "Or maybe we're just afraid. Maybe it's easier to make a clean, definitive choice than to live with the uncertainty of trying to reconcile both." The observation hit Catherine with surprising force. He was right. They both preferred control and certainty. They both tended to categorize, to organize, to establish clear boundaries in their lives. The idea of an ambiguous, evolving, adaptable arrangement was terrifying precisely because it escaped total control. "There's another possibility," he continued, taking her hand. "I could go with you." "Julian, you just took full control of the company. Your father is still recovering. The board has only just begun to fully trust your leadership. The company has global operations. We could open an office in New York, expand our presence in the U.S. He squeezed her hand gently. It wouldn't be simple, but it would be possible. His willingness to even consider this option touched her deeply. Here was a man who had spent his entire life under the control of others, finally gaining his independence and position of power, willing to rearrange everything for her. "I can't ask that of you," she said softly. "It wouldn't be fair. You're not asking, I'm offering." His eyes searched hers. "This is what real relationships involve, Catherine. Compromise, adaptation, growing together. Not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's difficult." She stood up, needing space to think. The idea of Julian abandoning everything to follow her was simultaneously romantic and deeply worrying. What if he resented it later? What if the company suffered in his absence? What if Helena used it as leverage to regain control? "We need time," she decided finally. "We both do. We can't make a decision of this magnitude in the heat of the moment. I agree. He stood up as well, moving closer. But we can't let fear make the decision for us. Whatever path we choose, it must be because we believe in it, not because it's the safest. How do we do that? How do we decide? Julian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. Separately first. We each need to determine what we really want, independent of the other. And then, together, we see if there's a path that allows us to have both. There was wisdom in his approach. Catherine nodded slowly. 1 week, then. No pressure. No trying to influence each other's decision. Just honest reflection. 1 week, he agreed, sealing the pact with a soft kiss. That night was different from the others. They made love with an almost desperate intensity, as if trying to memorize every sensation, every moment, as if it could be the last time. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they talked not of decisions or the future, but of memories and small details, first impressions, favorite moments, little discoveries about each other they had collected over the months. In the morning, Julian left after a quiet coffee. At the door, he kissed her deeply. 1 week, he reminded her, touching her face gently. Be honest with yourself, above all else. The following days were a whirlwind for Catherine. Professionally, she delved deep into the Madison and Hayes proposal, researching the company culture, talking to contacts who knew the organization, understanding exactly what the position would entail. Simultaneously, she assessed her own consultancy, which had grown significantly in recent years. Leaving it would mean abandoning something she had built from scratch, even if she could keep it running under third-party management. Personally, she allowed herself something rare, genuine emotional introspection. What did she really want for her life beyond professional success? What did Julian truly mean to her? Was it just the thrill of an unusual relationship, or something deeper and more lasting? On the third day, seeking clarity, she did something completely out of character. She visited her mother in Fort Lauderdale. Martha Mendez, a retired university professor, received her daughter with visible surprise. Their meetings were usually scheduled weeks in advance, always brief and structured lunches. To what do I owe the pleasure of this spontaneous visit? Martha asked, pouring tea on the porch of her modest home overlooking a canal. I need advice, Catherine admitted, the words feeling almost foreign in her mouth. For the next 40 minutes, she explained the entire situation. The job offer, the relationship with Julian, the dilemma she faced. Martha listened attentively without interruption, her wise eyes studying her daughter with renewed interest. In your entire adult life, Martha said finally, placing her cup on the table, I've never seen you genuinely undecided. You've always known exactly what you wanted and how to get it. It was always simpler before. No, it was just one-dimensional. Martha smiled softly. You channeled all your energy and focus into professional success. It was easier because there was no competition. And now? Now you've discovered there's more than one form of fulfillment. That success can be measured in different currencies. Martha leaned slightly forward. The question isn't which choice will make you more successful, Catherine. The question is which choice will make you more whole. The words resonated deeply. Catherine had never thought in terms of wholeness, only achievement. They were different concepts, she realized, one involving external accumulation, the other involving internal integration. How can I know which is which? She asked, feeling strangely young and inexperienced before her mother's quiet wisdom. Remove all external expectations, what others will think, what your resume will look like, what society values. Martha took her daughter's hand. Think only of what makes your heart expand instead of contract. What brings more life instead of just more accomplishment? Catherine absorbed the advice, surprised by its simplicity and depth. On the drive back to Miami, watching the familiar landscape through the car window, she allowed herself to visualize the two possible futures with brutal honesty. New York, new challenges, new status, a new environment. Days filled with high-level meetings, evenings at networking events, weekends recovering energy for the next intense week. Occasional calls with Julian, increasingly rare visits as they both became engrossed in their separate lives. Eventually, the connection fading until it was just a memory of what might have been. Miami, continuing to develop her consultancy, perhaps in new directions. Mornings waking up next to Julian, evenings sharing the day's experiences. Building something together, not just professionally but personally. A future with roots, with an emotional depth that would complement professional ambition rather than replace it. Both scenarios offered different satisfactions. Both required different sacrifices. The question, as her mother had suggested, was which would make her heart expand instead of contract. On the 6th day, still grappling with the decision, Catherine received an unexpected call. It was Frances Randall, the chairwoman of the board at Alistair Investments. "Catherine, I hope I'm not interrupting," Frances began. "I have a delicate matter to discuss. I'd prefer to do it in person if possible." Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, Catherine agreed to meet her for coffee at an elegant establishment in downtown Miami. Frances was already there when she arrived, striking in her impeccable navy blue suit, her grey hair cut in a modern, precise style. At 62, she was a legend in the American financial market, one of the first women to break the glass ceiling in the country's high finance. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Frances said, after the initial greetings. "I confess I'm curious as to the reason for this meeting," Catherine replied. Frances took a sip of her espresso before continuing. "I'm aware of your offer from Madison and Hayes." Catherine couldn't completely hide her surprise. "How did you—" "The high-level corporate world is smaller than it seems," Frances smiled slightly, "particularly when it involves exceptional talent being recruited internationally." "I see. But I don't see how this relates to Alistair Investments." "It relates on several levels." Frances placed her cup on the table with precision. "First, because it involves Julian, and anything that significantly affects our CEO is of interest to the board. Second, because we are considering a substantial expansion into the US over the next 2 years. Catherine felt her heart beat a little faster. Expansion into the US? It was already in the strategic plans even before the leadership transition. Marcus had initiated preliminary discussions before his absence. Frances paused deliberately. Julian brought the project back to the table at the last board meeting with an interesting additional element, which was the suggestion that he might personally lead the establishment of the New York office, at least during the initial 6 to 12-month phase. The implication was clear. Julian had already started laying the groundwork for a potential move. He was trying to create a path that would allow them both to pursue their careers without sacrificing their relationship. "I'm not here to interfere in personal decisions," Frances continued, "but as chairwoman of the board, I have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. And frankly, as someone who appreciates exceptional talent, I have an interest in seeing certain partnerships thrive rather than dissolve." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Nothing formally at this moment. Just sharing information that might be relevant to your decision." Frances leaned slightly forward. "And perhaps suggesting that there are more possibilities than just mutually exclusive choices." The conversation continued for another half hour, with Frances sharing details about the company's expansion plans. When they parted, Catherine felt simultaneously more hopeful and more confused. Frances's intervention had opened up possibilities she hadn't fully considered, but it also raised questions about Julian's influence. Had he manipulated the board to create this opportunity? Was he using his position to try to solve their dilemma? The idea was both touching and slightly unsettling. On her way home, her phone rang. It was Deborah. "Catherine, we have a situation at the office. Helena Alistair is here again. She insists on seeing you." Sighing deeply, Catherine redirected her driver to her office. What more could the Alistair matriarch want? Another attempt at bribery. More threats. When she arrived, she found Helena sitting calmly in her waiting room, elegant as always in a cream-colored suit, a string of pearls perfectly centered on her neck. "Mrs. Alistair," Catherine greeted her with cautious formality. "Please, let's go to my office." Once the door was closed, they studied each other for a moment, like duelists assessing their opponents before the first move. "I am aware of your offer in New York," Helena began without preamble, "and of Julian's intentions to potentially follow you." Catherine kept her expression neutral, tired of being surprised by the older woman's information network. "And this concerns you because I know my grandson better than he knows himself." Helena kept her hands perfectly folded in her lap. "And I know he is about to make a mistake that will harm both his career and the family legacy that has taken generations to build. With all due respect, Mrs. Alistair, Julian is an adult capable of making his own decisions. Is it naivety that makes you believe that, or just convenience?" Helena's tone was as sharp as a razor. "He has spent his entire life seeking approval, first mine, then his father's. now apparently yours. He is willing to sabotage everything we have built just to keep your interest. The characterization irritated Catherine. That's a gross oversimplification of a complex relationship. It is an accurate observation of a familiar pattern. Helena tilted her head slightly. You aren't the first, you know. His mother did the same, demanded that Marcus abandon the family company to follow her artistic ambitions abroad. He almost gave in until I intervened. The mention of Julian's mother captured Catherine's attention. He rarely spoke of the woman who had abandoned him in childhood. What kind of intervention was that exactly? She asked, unable to contain her curiosity. A thin smile appeared on Helena's perfectly painted lips. I showed her who she truly was, an opportunist who put her own needs above her family's. I offered her a clear choice: leave alone with a generous financial settlement, or drag my son to ruin and end up with nothing. The calculated coldness of the confession shocked Catherine, even knowing Helena's manipulative character. You forced his mother to abandon him. I saved my son and my grandson from a life of instability and mediocrity. Helena's voice showed no remorse. Sophia was never suited for our family. Her artistic temperament, her emotional impulsiveness, she would have destroyed Marcus and completely confused Julian's development. Catherine felt a wave of painful understanding. The scars of abandonment that Julian carried, his difficulty with emotional intimacy, his tendency to observe from a distance rather than participate directly, it all had deeper roots than she had imagined. Why are you telling me this? Because you, unlike her, seem to possess strategic intelligence. Helena adjusted the bracelet on her wrist with perfectly manicured fingers. You understand long-term calculation, the weighing of costs and benefits. You must understand that dragging Julian to New York would be detrimental to everyone involved, including himself. And if I refuse the offer, if I stay in Miami, then you would be demonstrating unexpected wisdom. Helena smiled coldly. But we both know your ambition won't allow that. You will go to New York, Ms. Mendes. The only question is whether you will destroy my grandson in the process. With that, she rose gracefully. Just consider this. If you truly care for Julian, the choice is clear. Accept the offer and end the relationship cleanly and definitively. Allow him to remain where he belongs, leading the legacy he was groomed to command. Helena walked to the door, then stopped, turning one last time. He will get over it eventually. Men always do. And you will have your glory in New York without the weight of guilt for having pulled him away from his destiny. When the door closed, Catherine remained motionless, feeling as if she had been hit by a wave. Helena's manipulation was impressive in its precision and cruelty. Every word had been carefully chosen to plant seeds of doubt and guilt. The worst part was that some of those seeds found fertile ground. What if Helena was partly right? What if Julian was driven not just by genuine love, but by deeply ingrained patterns of seeking approval and fearing abandonment? What if she really was pulling him away from where he belonged? The phone on her desk rang, bringing her back to the present. It was Julian. Catherine, his voice sounded urgent. Was Helena with you? How did you know? Regina just informed me she cancelled all her afternoon appointments for an urgent personal matter. He sighed heavily. What did she say? Many things. Mostly about your mother, Sophia. A heavy silence followed on the other end of the line. When Julian spoke again, his voice was controlled, but Catherine could feel the underlying tension. We need to talk, not over the phone. Can I come over now? Of course. While she waited, Catherine tried to organize her thoughts. The week of separate reflection they had agreed upon was almost over, and she was more confused than when it had started. The interventions from Francis and Helena had added new layers of complexity to an already impossible decision. When Julian arrived, he looked tense, almost rigid. He closed the door carefully behind him. What exactly did Helena tell you about my mother? Catherine recounted the conversation with precision, watching the emotions cross his face: anger, pain, resignation. When she finished, Julian was standing by the window, his back to her, his shoulders visibly tense. Was she lying? Catherine asked gently. Not entirely, which makes her all the more dangerous. He turned to face her. Helena did interfere. She did offer my mother money to leave, but the full story is more complicated. I'm listening. My parents had an arranged marriage, essentially. Marcus Alistair, a promising heir. Sophia Daniels, daughter of a traditional family with useful political connections. It looked perfect on paper. He walked slowly around the room, as if the physical movement helped to organize painful thoughts. My mother was truly artistic, a talented painter, in fact, but she wasn't impulsive or irresponsible like Helena portrays her. She was just suffocated, trapped in a life she never chose, married to a man who respected her but didn't truly love her. How do you know all this? You were only 5 when she left. Because I found her, when I was 17. The revelation surprised Catherine. How? Private investigation. Ironic, isn't it? A sad smile crossed his lips. I hired a detective with my trust fund. Helena never knew. And what did you discover? That my mother never went to India with a yoga instructor. He shook his head slowly. She went to Portugal, alone. She started a small art gallery in Lisbon, lived modestly, never touching the money Helena gave her. Did you confront her? I spent a week with her during a supposed school camping trip. His eyes held a distant memory. She cried when she saw me, said she tried to take me with her, but Helena threatened to use all the family's connections to accuse her of international kidnapping. A battle she couldn't win. Catherine felt a wave of empathy for the woman she had never met, forced to choose between her freedom and her child, manipulated by a ruthless adversary. Why did she never come back or try to make contact? Helena made her sign legal documents relinquishing custody as a condition of the payment, and she threatened to sue my father for custody if she attempted any contact. Julian sighed deeply, but mostly because she believed I would be better off with the opportunities the Alistair family could provide. A sacrifice she made out of love, not selfishness. Are you still in contact with her? Sporadically. Helena still doesn't know. He looked at her directly. Sophia now lives in Barcelona. She remarried, has a 15-year-old daughter, my half-sister. The revelation of this long-held secret created a new dimension of intimacy between them. Julian was sharing not just facts, but deeply rooted vulnerabilities, connections he had kept hidden even from his controlling grandmother. Why are you telling me this now? Catherine asked softly. Because Helena is using the same playbook on you that she used on my mother. He moved closer, taking her hands, trying to make you believe you will harm me if you follow what you desire. That the choice is between your happiness and mine. And it isn't? Happiness is not a zero-sum commodity, Catherine. His eyes searched hers with intensity. Helena has always seen relationships as strategic transactions, where someone inevitably loses so another can win. It's how she sees the entire world. And you see it differently. I believe we can find a path where we both thrive. He squeezed her hands gently. It won't be easy or perfectly balanced all the time. There will be compromises and adjustments. But it's possible. Catherine felt something shift inside her, a perspective changing, a possibility opening. Her whole life had been built on the idea that personal and professional success were individual achievements, calculated and controlled. The idea of a shared, evolving, adaptable path was simultaneously frightening and liberating. Frances Randall approached me today, she revealed. She mentioned the expansion plans in the US. Your involvement in them. Julian looked momentarily surprised, then nodded slowly. I was going to tell you tomorrow, when our week of reflection was over. I didn't want to influence your decision prematurely. Is it a real possibility? You leading the New York office? Yes, it was already in the strategic plans. I just accelerated the timeline. He hesitated. It wouldn't be permanent, at least not at first. 6 months to a year with frequent trips back to Miami. Eventually we would hire a permanent local director. So it would be temporary. The distance would be. We wouldn't be. His eyes never left hers. Catherine, I know we promised a week of separate reflection, but I need to say something now before any decision is made. What? I love you. The words, so simple and yet so monumental, hung between them. In her entire adult life, Catherine had never allowed a relationship to reach the point where those words could be genuinely exchanged. She had kept men at a safe, controlled distance, where intense feelings could never fully blossom. I don't expect you to say it back, Julian continued, seeing her expression. I just need you to know, before you decide your next step, what I feel for you isn't casual or convenient. It's real, deep and lasting. And whatever you choose, that won't change. Catherine felt unexpected tears form in her eyes. His absolute vulnerability, the courage to lay his heart bare with no guarantees, touched her in a way no grand gesture ever could. Our week isn't over yet, she said finally, her voice slightly trembling. We need this last day, both of us. He nodded, respecting her request for space. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow. When he left, Catherine remained motionless for a long time, watching the Miami sky gradually darken through her office window. His words echoed in her mind, along with Helena's manipulations and the possibilities suggested by Francis. Somewhere between all these external voices, she needed to find her own. She needed to determine what her heart truly desired. Stripped of expectations, fears, and conditioning, the night stretched on in contemplation, the hours passing as she faced, perhaps for the first time, the full truth of her own desires. Dawn found her still awake, exhausted but strangely clear. When the sun finally rose over the Miami horizon, Catherine Mendez had made her decision. Chapter 7. Intertwined Fates. The terrace of the South Beach Palace Hotel was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon when Catherine arrived. She had chosen the location deliberately, neutral, public enough to maintain composure, private enough for an honest conversation, a place that represented Miami in its splendor. Julian was already there, standing by the balustrade, watching the activity on the beach below. When he turned and saw her, his face lit up with a restrained smile, the one she had learned to recognize as genuine. "You look beautiful," he said as she approached. Catherine had chosen a simple dress in an emerald green hue, her hair loose on her shoulders, less formal than her usual professional look, more authentic. A discreet waiter appeared with 2 glasses of champagne. They sat at a secluded table overlooking the sea. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "So," Julian said finally, "we've reached the end of our week." "Yes," she replied, gently turning the glass between her fingers. It was clarifying. "For me, too." He studied her intently. "You seem different today." "I feel different." She took a deep breath. "I've spent my entire life building structures, strategies, plans, defenses, everything carefully calculated to maximize control and minimize vulnerability. I recognize the pattern." He smiled faintly. "But I realized something these past few days." She looked at him directly. All those structures, as secure as they seemed, were gradually turning into a prison. A very comfortable and elegant one, but a prison nonetheless. Julian nodded, encouraging her to continue. "When I received the offer from New York, my first instinct was to analyze it, as I always have, calculating professional advantages, projecting career trajectories." She smiled. "It was the obvious path, the next logical step on the ladder I've always climbed so methodically. And now? Now I realize I was asking the wrong question." She reached out, touching his hand on the table. "It's not about which option will make me more successful, but which will make me more alive." Something lit up in Julian's eyes, an understanding, a recognition. "And what's the answer?" he asked, his voice low. "The answer is that I no longer want to choose between success and connection, between ambition and affection. I refuse to accept these terms, these false dichotomies that Helena and so many others insist on imposing on us." She saw hope grow in his gaze, but also caution. "I called Madison and Hayes this morning," Catherine continued. Julian visibly tensed, bracing himself for what was to come. "I negotiated new terms." A smile spread across her face. "I accepted the position, but with a significant modification. I will establish the Latin American division with its headquarters in Miami, not New York." "In Miami?" The surprise was evident in his voice. "Why not? The U.S. is the gateway to Latin America. It makes more strategic sense to lead the region from here than from Manhattan." Her smile widened. Surprisingly, they agreed almost immediately. The relief on Julian's face was palpable, but Catherine held up a hand to indicate she wasn't finished. "This doesn't mean I'll be exclusively in Miami. There will be frequent travel, New York, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, several weeks at a time sometimes. It won't be the perfect or most convenient arrangement." "Life is rarely perfect or convenient," he replied, a slow smile growing. "Especially an authentic life." "Exactly," she squeezed his hand. "And you? Did your week of reflection bring clarity as well?" Julian took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, though not in the way I initially expected." "How so?" "When I proposed the expansion to New York, I was trying to create a clean, symmetrical solution, an elegant compromise where no one would really have to sacrifice anything." He shook his head slightly. "It was still my old pattern of trying to control all the variables to avoid uncertainty. And now I realize it's not about finding the perfect solution, but about committing to the imperfect process." His eyes met hers with new intensity. International expansion is still part of the company's plan, and I will certainly be part of it. But I don't need to manipulate entire corporate structures just to accommodate my personal desires. So we'll be where we need to be, when we need to be there, sometimes together, sometimes apart, building something joint, even when physically distant. Catherine felt a wave of emotion. She had secretly feared he would offer some grand sacrifice for her. Instead, he was offering genuine partnership, adaptable, evolving, mature. "And Helena?" she asked, knowing the matriarch wouldn't give up easily. "Helena will have to accept that she can no longer control my life." A serene determination shone in his eyes. "Actually, I had a long talk with her yesterday." "How did it go?" "Honest, painful, necessary." He took a sip of champagne. "For the first time I spoke openly about Sophia, about knowing the truth for years, about my half-sister in Barcelona." "How did she react?" "Initially with denial, then anger, finally a sort of reluctant resignation." He smiled faintly. "I also made it clear that while I respect her role in the company and the family, I will no longer allow manipulations in my personal life. That I love you and that this is not open for negotiation or interference." Did she accept that? Helena is many things, but she is not a fool. She realized she was in new territory with me, that the old manipulation tactics would no longer work. "An evolution, not a revolution," Catherine observed. "Exactly." He leaned forward, taking both of her hands in his. "And that's how I see our path too. Not a dramatic break with our past lives, but a gradual evolution into something more integrated, more authentic." The sun was now touching the horizon, bathing the terrace in golden light. Catherine felt a clarity and peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Julian," she said softly, "there's something I didn't say yesterday when you spoke." "What?" His gaze was attentive, patient. "I love you too." The words came out naturally, without the weight she had always feared. "I've never said that to anyone before. I never allowed a relationship to get to this point. I never wanted to." A radiant smile transformed his face. "And now? Now I want to. I want to build something with you, something that isn't perfectly controlled or predictable, something alive, evolving." She squeezed his hands. "I will still be ambitious. I will still be achievement-oriented. You will still be meticulous and strategic. We're not abandoning who we are fundamentally, just expanding the possibilities of what we can be together," he completed. "Yes," she smiled. "And that to me is true freedom. Not the absence of commitment, but the deliberate choice of it." Julian stood up, still holding her hands, and gently pulled her into his arms. There, with the setting Miami sun as their witness, they kissed, not with the urgency of initial passion, but with the quiet depth of those who have finally found a place to belong. 6 months later, Catherine was arranging documents on her desk in the new office. The Miami headquarters of Madison and Hayes occupied the top floor of a recently renovated historic building in downtown, with high windows that let in abundant natural light. In just half a year, she had established a significant presence for the company in Latin America, recruiting local talent and winning major clients. The work was challenging and stimulating, requiring frequent travel throughout the region and regular visits to the New York headquarters. Her phone vibrated with a message from Julian. "Board meeting is over. Dinner at 8 to celebrate?" "I have some interesting news." She smiled, quickly typing an affirmative reply. In the past few months, they had found a rhythm that worked surprisingly well for both of them. Their careers remained intense and ambitious, but now they orbited each other instead of following completely separate paths. At the Coconut Grove apartment they now shared, Catherine arrived first that evening. When Julian walked in, he was carrying a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of colorful tropical flowers. "We're really celebrating, I see," she commented, accepting the flowers with a kiss. "Absolutely." He seemed excited, almost radiant. "The board unanimously approved our joint venture with the Swiss bank. It's the largest international deal in the company's history." During dinner, Julian shared another surprising piece of news. "I'm planning a visit to Sophia next month, to finally meet my half-sister in person. I'd like you to come with me." The request touched her deeply. Meeting his mother and sister was clearly a significant step for Julian, one he wanted to share with her. "I'd love to," she answered sincerely. "There's more." He hesitated briefly. "I'm considering buying a small apartment there, in Barcelona." She was genuinely surprised. "Why?" "For regular visits to my family. for an occasional refuge from the intensity of Miami and business. And he looked at her meaningfully. For us, when we need a place that's just ours, away from everyone and everything we know. The idea was surprisingly tempting. A neutral space, not entirely his, nor entirely hers. A new territory for them to explore together. After dinner, with fresh glasses of champagne, they settled on the spacious balcony. The night was exceptionally clear, the Miami sky dotted with stars above the dark ocean. "Do you know what has surprised me most these past few months?" Julian reflected, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. "What?" "How liberating it is to let go of the illusion of total control." He looked at her fondly. "I spent my whole life believing that security came from predicting and manipulating every possible variable. Now I realize there's a deeper security in simply trusting the process, trusting us." Catherine nodded, understanding perfectly. "Control was always my obsession too. The idea of surrendering to something unpredictable, to someone I couldn't completely manipulate, it was unthinkable. And now I understand that true power isn't in external control, but in internal courage." She snuggled closer to him. "In the willingness to risk, to feel, to live fully even without guarantees." He gently kissed the top of her head. "We're an interesting case study, aren't we? Two pathologically controlling people learning the art of surrender." She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I prefer to think of us as two exceptional strategists who have finally found a game worthy of their talents." "And what game would that be?" "Building a life that honors both our individual ambitions and our shared connection." She lifted her face to look at him. "A game with no fixed rules, constantly evolving. The only one that really matters." Julian studied her with that characteristic intensity she had grown to cherish, the look of someone who truly saw beyond the surface. "Do you know what my first impression of you was at that first formal meeting?" he asked. "That I was controlling, manipulative, calculating." She smiled, teasing. "That you were someone who had built a magnificent fortress around an extraordinary treasure." His eyes never left hers. "And that I wanted to be the person you would invite inside." "And you?" he asked. "What was your first impression?" Catherine considered for a moment. "That you were the first man who looked at me and truly saw me. Not just what I showed, but what I hid." She caressed his face gently. "It was terrifying and irresistible." "What's next for us?" she asked finally. Julian smiled, that rare, full smile that lit up his entire face. "I have no idea. And that, my love, is what makes it all so extraordinary." There, under the starry Miami sky, Catherine Mendes, the woman who had always known exactly what the next step was, discovered the profound joy of an unmapped future, but one infinitely richer for being shared.